Let's start off by looking at this concept of account, specifically the AWS account. This gets a little confusing because if somebody says, here's your account, you're probably thinking, that's a user account. I log on to the network. I log on to a service on the internet. Amazon account is a little different. It's created when you sign up for AWS services, and you're going to sign up with your choice of email address and password. And that lets you into the Amazon cloud world. And from that account perspective, you'll have access to all of the resources in the 20 different regions, or even more regions. When you're watching this, there could be even more than 20 that are around the world for you to choose where you're going to create resources or use services. So the big takeaway is your AWS account is not a user account per se. It's the account where you build your Amazon cloud resources. Within your AWS account, here's the slightly confusing part, you can create additional administrator accounts, typically user accounts, to access the different resources. So when you're in your brand new AWS account, there has to be an account, a quote unquote user, which I'm calling the super administrator. And this is the root account. A root account signifies that you are the top person, the top entity in your account, and you can do anything that you want. There's no restrictions. It can't be controlled. And ultimately, you have full say in what's going on with your account. Now, note I say it can't be deleted. That's not technically true, but if you think about it, if I go through and delete my AWS account, that means the root account would get deleted. So I would not have anything anymore. So the only time that you would be getting rid of the root account is when you deleted your entire AWS account. So within this account, our AWS account, which by the way, you can have numerous AWS accounts, it might be a great idea for you to check with other people in your company and say, do you have your own AWS account? And you may be surprised. There might be 2 or 3. There might be many different accounts. If you think of it from a developer point of view, you might have signed up yourself to look at AWS, and other people within your company might have signed up with AWS to look at the different services. So within the account, we can create the traditional users and groups. Now, when I say traditional, it is a user account or a group account, but typically these are going to be administrators that are working on the cloud infrastructure that your company is using. And these types of accounts or groups are called IAM users and groups. That's Identity and Access Management. That's a service that's built in to every AWS account. You can think of it as a cloud-hosted security system that manages everything that you're actually going to use at AWS. Now, something to check. If you're currently working at AWS, or if you're a consultant and you're working with other companies and they give you a logon that's an email address, then congratulations, you're using the root account. You can do anything that you want. That might sound great for a second, but then think about this. What if you shared that account with other users? Then they could go through and delete anything that was created. So certainly not an account to use for daily administration. So when we look at the design of AWS accounts, there is no perfect way to design these accounts. Amazon tries, and they have lots of documentation on the types of accounts, the types of structures that you should follow. And this makes sense if you have no infrastructure, but it never really works this way. But they have some suggestions as to what you might want to consider. Do you have a head office with sub-branch offices? Would a single account actually work for your company with these different divisions? Or do you want to separate the accounts because of security? Do you have development, test, and production? Do you want to actually signify that your job is only in development and I'll control you with a separate account? Again, there's no perfect mix of what you can and can't do. It's totally up to you. But I think you could see how this could get kind of off the rails if you didn't sit down and try to figure out long-term, how many accounts should we use? If you have multiple locations, such as different cities like San Jose, New York, Chicago, Toronto, or maybe other cities in Europe or in Australia, Maybe you want to manage it by city locations. If these are autonomous locations where, let's say, the administrators and users in San Jose don't need anything from Toronto. Now, let's say you did need something from Toronto. There are ways of sharing information from these separate accounts, but accounts by default start off as a separate entity. You could also look at the management of your accounts through governance as to what you're allowed to do. Maybe the top administrators in your company create a lot of the infrastructure, such as a virtual private cloud, the VPC, and the security for your networks, such as NACLs, or the subnets and the different user accounts that can use these resources. Maybe you have to create some sort of flow chart to say who gets to do what, who has the amount of control that's allowed. Maybe you want to define EC2 instances, RDS databases, and EBS storage, and have certain accounts that control these resources. So spend some time outside of this class and decide what's the long-term picture for AWS with your company over the next 3 to 5 years, and look at the number of different accounts that you may want to use or the single account that you might want to mandate in your organization.